Episode 11. It probably wasn't something decent to say to girls. Queenie's face turned red, and she whispered, "My mother said we can't share a room with boys." In fact, Chuck Cannon didn't think much about it either and just said so on impulse. But to be frank, Queenie is actually young and very beautiful. Because she was poor, she usually wore cheap clothes and didn't wear any makeup when she went out. How could she look good? But with a little makeup and some short denim pants that revealed her long, slender legs, she would definitely look prettier than Laura Jean and the other girls. But the school dormitory has been closed. Where are you going to sleep if you don't get a room? Chuck asked helplessly. Queenie's heart beat faster. In fact, she didn't have many feelings for Chuck. She had good impressions of him and were at the most just good friends. It was true that she was really touched that Chuck accompanied her and waited for the car owner just now. But even though she was touched, she couldn't share a room with him. But if we don't get a room, does it mean we'll sleep on the street? Queenie was in a dilemma. She bit her lip and looked at Chuck. She was worried that he might do something to her if they shared a room. As soon as she started to speak, Chuck said, "Okay, let's not get a room then. I'll take you to a place and you can rest there." "Really? Where?" Queenie was surprised. Chuck could only tell her the address of the house he had bought today. The previous owner had already moved all his furnitures and items, and since it was rather hot, they could just buy a mattress and sleep on the floor. Anyway, it had 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms, so Queenie would feel more at ease. High Street District? It's a very lively place in the city. Queenie was surprised that Chuck knew such a place. After all, she knew that Chuck was as poor as her. "Yes, it's there. I'm doing a part-time job as an agent recently. There's a house to sell and the owner is in a hurry, so he gave me the key to make it easier to take a look at the house. We can stay a night there since no one else knows," Chuck said. Queenie hesitated. "Isn't it inappropriate to do this?" "It is up to you. If not, our only option is to get a room." "Don't worry, no one else would know. The owner is not in the city anyway," Chuck persuaded. "Okay." Queenie bit her lip. She had not done a thing like living in someone else's house yet. What if the owner comes home at night? But if she didn't do so, she could only get a room with Chuck, and everyone knew the meaning behind a room together. She knew that it was better to be friends with Chuck than crossing the boundary of friendship. "Well, then wait a minute. Chuck almost spilled the beans and said that he was going to drive. "What are you going to do?" Queenie was confused. "Nothing. We can go there by taking taxi," Chuck said. Yep, the two of them went to the roadside to get a taxi. Chuck had no choice but to park his car here for a night. Soon, they got a taxi and went to Chuck's house. When they got out of the car, the driver was surprised and asked enviously, "Young man, you bought a house here? The houses here cost almost $2 million, you must be a rich guy." Chuck coughed. It was indeed the house he bought, but Queenie just felt embarrassed and thought, "This is the house of the owner. We came here just for a night." The driver drove away and the two of them stood in silence. Queenie felt that she was doing something bad, so she was nervous. What if the owner came back? But now, she could only follow Chuck inside. Queenie had never been here before, and the interior was amazing. She wanted to live here in the future, but the price was too expensive. She would never be able to afford it even if she worked for the rest of her life, so she had no choice but to dispel the thought. They took the elevator and arrived at the designated floor. Chuck opened the door and went in, while Queenie followed and immediately heaved a sigh of relief. It was indeed empty inside. Chuck really didn't lie to her, the house was currently vacant. The roof, the wall and the cabinet that couldn't be removed were in top condition. One could already imagine how extravagant it was before. "This house is so big and beautiful. How much does the owner intend to sell it for?" Queenie asked curiously. $3,560,000. It's so expensive. Is there anyone who can afford it? Queenie asked in surprise. "Yes," Chuck said with a smile. "True, there are still a lot of rich people. I don't know who will buy it in the end." Queenie nodded, her eyes darting around the house. "Then which room should I stay in?" "It's up to you. There's bathroom in every room," Chuck replied. "Well, then I'll stay here." Queenie pointed at a room and walked over. Then she turned back and waved at him saying, "Thank you Chuck, good night." "Well, good night," Chuck replied with a smile. Seeing that Queenie had closed the door, Chuck began to study how to place the furniture the next day. After he had a rough plan, Chuck entered a room randomly. Queenie, who was leaning against the door, let out a sigh of relief when she heard Chuck entering the room, but soon she felt depressed. She sat on the floor, her thoughts swirling. She was actually in a house with a boy. Although they were not in the same room, it still felt strange. She was very nervous when she leaned against the door just now, afraid that Chuck would come over. If he barged into the room, she, as a girl, would certainly not be able to defend herself. What should she do? Refuse him fiercely, or? She had thought of countless countermeasures and waited anxiously. However, Chuck did not come over, which also made her feel a little uncomfortable. It was difficult to describe. It was strange, just like the story of the Monkey King in the peach garden, who stopped the 7 gorgeous angels from moving just to go pick some peaches and totally ignored the beautiful fairies. Queenie also didn't understand why she would think so. Soon, she was depressed. How much will the car owner ask from her if he called her tomorrow? Would the owner agree to let her pay in installments? Queenie was upset. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes slowly. When Chuck was still sleeping in the morning, he was awoken by a phone call from the real estate agent, saying that Yvette Jordan was ready to leave as well. Everyone was going to gather at the Ministry of Housing to prepare for the transfer of the ownership of the house. Chuck immediately got up. His back was sore and painful because he slept on the floor last night. Fortunately, he could sleep on a big bed tonight. After going out of the room, Chuck found that Queenie had been waiting for a long time. Seeing that she was tired, Chuck asked curiously, "Didn't sleep well last night?" "Well, I'm worried that the house owner will come back, so." Queenie said softly, "Let's leave quickly, before the house owner will be here. It will be difficult and awkward to explain why we are here." Chuck smiled and agreed. Queenie was curious. How could he be so calm after doing such a bad thing? She did not think much about it. The two of them exited the house and took the elevator down. By the side of the road, Queenie asked Chuck if he wanted to go to the class together. Chuck had to deal with transfer of house ownership, so of course, he couldn't go to the university. He could only say he wanted to leave for his part-time work. "All right, I'll go back first." Queenie took out some small change and went to take the bus. Okay, as Queenie got on the bus, Chuck hailed a taxi to take him to the parking spot yesterday. Queenie looked through the window and saw the BMW from yesterday still parked there. She was perturbed. When would the owner call her? As the bus pulled further and further from the BMW, she sighed. How nice would it be if the owner of the BMW was her friend? If so, they could talk about the compensation of the car's damages in installments. It was a pity that she did not have such a friend. Queenie's gaze dimmed. Chuck drove to the Ministry of Housing. When he arrived at the car park, he called the agent. The agent said that he saw him and would come over soon, but when he arrived, he was overwhelmed with admiration and envy. He thought he was wrong when he saw Chuck driving a BMW 7 Series. But from another perspective, what was wrong for someone who could buy 2 houses consecutively to buy a luxury BMW? It was a good match. Mr. Cannon, changed car? The agent was envious. He thought that Chuck had several cars and this was just a new car to his collection. Chuck shook his head and said that it was his first car. The agent was surprised and looked at Chuck again, this time with approval. He was obviously a rich kid, but this was just his first car. If he knew how to control his desires, this Mr. Cannon will definitely have a good future. He was definitely rich for a reason. Chuck had already told the agent yesterday that he would first transfer it to the real estate agency, and then the agency will transfer it back to Chuck. He didn't have to contact Yvette during the whole process. For Yvette, it was impossible for her to know that the person who bought her house was Chuck. However, while they were discussing, Chuck suddenly heard a confused voice. "Chuck, why are you here?" Chuck looked back automatically and realized that it was Yvette, a puzzled look hanging on her face. He suddenly panicked. "Oh no, I can't let her know." Episode 12. He suddenly panicked. "Oh no, I can't let her know. What are you doing here?" Yvette Jordan's brows furrowed. This was the Ministry of Housing. She was surprised to see Chuck in such a place. "I'm doing a part-time job. Learning how to transfer customers' ownership." Chuck came up randomly with an excuse. Otherwise, what could he tell Yvette? A part-time job? The surprise on Yvette's face was swept away. It was logical for him to be doing a part-time job here. Or else, what other business will we have here? Since you have chosen to do this, then do it well. If you do it here, I heard that the salary for an agent can be as much as over $10,000. Yvette informed him with a look of resignation. Chuck nodded. It was meaningless for him to have more than $10,000 per month now. If Yvette knew that he had bought over her house, what would she think? The agent was momentarily stunned but soon understood Chuck's words. So he smiled and said, "I see you two are acquainted." Yes, Chuck is a part-time agent. Today, I brought him here to let him get familiar with the process. Miss Jordan, would you prefer him to follow you, or? Whatever, Yvette said coldly. Chuck heaved a sigh of relief. Yvette looked around and was a little confused. Where is the person that bought my house? The boss is very busy. He won't be able to come over today. The agent apologized. Chuck was a little nervous, because Yvette's brows knitted themselves deeply once again in a slight annoyance. The agreement has already been made. How can we transfer the ownership if he doesn't come? Miss Jordan, don't worry. The boss has already told me to have Miss Jordan transfer the ownership to me first, and then I'll transfer it to the boss, the agent explained. Isn't it troublesome? When will that boss be free then? I am not in a hurry since the deposit has been paid anyways. I can wait for 1 or 2 days. Yvette's expression eased. Chuck hurriedly winked at the real estate agent. The boss has been busy recently, so he has asked me to do so. It is a little troublesome, but it's the only way. Don't worry, Miss Jordan. After the transfer today, the money will be immediately transferred to your account, the agent said. Yvette thought for a few seconds and nodded. Well, that's fine, but who's the boss? He trusts you too much. Haha, it's all because I'm trustworthy, isn't it? The real estate agent laughed. Trust is only one aspect. The person must be rich to not care about this kind of money, so he let you deal with it. There are so many rich people in the city, and I know some of them. Who is this boss of yours? Maybe I know him, Yvette said coldly. Chuck glanced at the agent and laughed silently. Indeed, they knew each other. The real estate agent smiled and then laughed. Haha, I guess so. Anyway, this boss is young and promising, so Miss Jordan should know him. Should? Yvette's gaze glistened. This reminded her of a certain someone. She had always wondered why someone would choose to buy her house despite it being on sale for just half a day. In addition, they insisted on not showing up for the transfer process. Could it be him? Chuck was curious. Who did she think of? Then what is the name of this boss? Yvette asked, and her tone became a little expectant. Chuck suddenly became nervous. This real estate agent was smart. He wouldn't say it out directly, would he? This person, anyway, he is young and promising. Miss Jordan, you can think about it by yourself, the agent said with a smile. Yvette's face was full of disappointment, but she didn't give up and asked, Baller. Is he called Baller? Chuck was stunned. Turns out that after some analyzing, Yvette had guessed it was him. Baller? He must be a baller. How could he not be a baller since he had bought Miss Jordan's house in full payment? The agent said with a smile. Yvette was speechless. They were talking about two completely different things. Miss Jordan, please follow me, the agent said. Yvette strolled forward, her long slender legs making her way across. However, when she saw Chuck not moving from his spot, she frowned. Chuck, don't you want to learn the process of the transfer? Why are you not following? If you're trying to slack off, how will you be able to do your job properly? What are you looking at? Hurry up. The real estate agent was clever enough to wave to Chuck. Chuck walked over embarrassingly. If you want to do it, just do it well, Yvette said coldly. Yes. Chuck could only nod. The three of them entered the Ministry of Housing. When the real estate agent went to line up to process some documents, Chuck's mobile phone suddenly vibrated. He doubtfully took it out and looked at it. It turned out to be Yvette's WeChat message. Baller, are you nearby me? Seeing these words, Chuck was quite stunned. He looked at Yvette secretly and found that she was sitting and glancing around, but she didn't look at him at all. Chuck smiled in relief, but at the same time, he smiled bitterly. Seemed that Yvette never expected him to be the baller. If she knew that baller was indeed Chuck Cannon, who she had never thought of, what would be her expression? Chuck was afraid that Yvette would find out, so he hurriedly switched his phone to silent mode and put it in his pocket. It vibrated several times in a row, which means that Yvette had sent messages in succession. However, Chuck did not reply or check the messages at all. After a few minutes, the vibration stopped. Chuck looked over and saw the disappointed look on Yvette's face. It was probably because Baller was ignoring her. As expected, during the transfer process, Yvette's face was stoic all the time, but thankfully, the process was quick. 2 hours later, the transfer process was completed, and they headed to the bank. Chuck followed the whole process. When they came out of the bank, Yvette looked at Chuck in disapproval and said coldly with disappointment, "You are not suitable for this job." After that, she drove away. Chuck was stunned. What's wrong? Did Yvette mean he was incapable? He was helpless and could not follow the agent to the ministry again. It was not until afternoon that he had transferred the ownership. He sighed in relief. Just as he was about to rest for a while, the furniture he ordered had reached his doorstep. Chuck could only drive back as they had called him up. It was not until 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening that the furniture was placed according to his request. Sitting on the sofa, Chuck felt as if the last few days were just a flurrying dream. In just a few days, he actually owned something that most ordinary people could only dream of but could not have: 2 houses and a BMW. After lying down for a while, Chuck finally had time to check his phone. When he opened the WeChat, he was stunned. Yvette had sent 7 or 8 messages. "Baller, why aren't you saying anything? Are you in the Ministry of Housing? Are you afraid that I will see you? Baller, you saved me and even transferred $200,000 to me. You must have helped me because I know you, that's why I think my house was bought by you. Are you busy? I'm sorry to disturb you. You go ahead with your work first. Baller, the transfer is completed. I'll treat you to dinner, don't reject me. I'll be at Modern Restaurant today. I've arrived at Modern Restaurant. Where are you? Is it too sudden? If so, I'll apologize to you, but I've arrived at the restaurant. Can you come out to meet me? I just want to thank you. I will wait for you today. Whether you come or not, I will wait for you." Chuck read these messages, the last one being sent just a few minutes ago. Her last message was filled with disappointment. Does that mean that Yvette has been waiting for him in the Modern Restaurant for over an hour? Chuck was surprised. It was already 8-something in the event, so Yvette should have left, right? Chuck hesitated for a while, then he got up and drove to the restaurant. Halfway, Queenie Carson called, saying that she was very anxious. Why wasn't the car owner calling her? Chuck could only reply that the car owner probably didn't mind, and asked her not to think too much. "But I've done something wrong. I should bear the responsibility," Queenie said. "Since you have a good attitude, they probably knew and chose to let it go." "Don't think too much," Chuck comforted her. "Well, I'll still wait for his call. I've found a new part-time job today. It's in a Western restaurant, $15 an hour. I need to make some money. Otherwise, if the owner calls me, I won't have the money to pay them back." Yep. After hanging up the phone, Chuck was tongue-tied. Such a serious and hardworking girl was hard to come by. He didn't know where the restaurant that she was working part-time was, but at this time, he had already arrived at the Modern Restaurant. Hence, he didn't continue to think about it. He drove into the car park. As the security guard noticed such a luxurious car swerving in, he immediately gave way and helped Chuck arrange for a parking space. There were too many luxury cars nearby, so Chuck had to be careful when parking. When he finally parked his car, he came out and saw that Yvette's car was still there. She was still waiting. Chuck hesitated for a moment, then his cell phone rang as a WeChat message arrived. He opened the app and noticed that the message was from Yvette. There was inconceivable disappointment in her words. "Baller, are you coming?" Episode 13. There was inconceivable disappointment in her words. "Baller, are you coming?" Chuck Cannon didn't respond after reading Yvette Jordan's WeChat. In fact, he also didn't know what he was doing here. He wouldn't be able to meet Yvette anyways. If she saw that Baller was actually Chuck who had been sleeping with her since childhood, she would probably be furious. After a moment of silence, Chuck decided against replying to her WeChat nor going in. However, her WeChat message arrived once more. "Whether you come today or not, I will wait for you. I just want to see you. I can't do anything. The point is that you will be pissed off if you saw me." Chuck thought. Chuck did not reply. Conflicted, he decided to go in and have a look. After all, he was already there. Yvette couldn't just be sitting near the door, right? But Chuck was just about to enter when he saw a beautiful woman driving a luxury car passing by him. It seemed that she was ready to park the car, and there was only one space left. It happened to be next to his car. However, Chuck's parking skill was really not very good. With the width of the car, the parking space was narrow, so the beautiful woman's car could not get in at all. If they hit each other, Chuck would feel distressed. Chuck hurried over and was about to ask the beauty to stop first. He would park the car again, but when he got closer, he was amazed. The woman had already left for the security booth of the parking lot, her long legs etching themselves into Chuck's mind. He came to his senses and was puzzled. Why did the woman leave before she parked her car? While Chuck was confused, he saw the woman coming with the security guard. She pointed at his car with her slender fingers and said coldly, "What's the matter? I've told you many times that everyone has different upbringings. Each time they come in, they have to park the car properly. The parking space is already so small and yet he double parks. Whose car is this? Not even leaving a number. Is the person used to acting so rudely? Go in and call this person to come out." Yes. After being reprimanded, the security guard immediately nodded and was about to go in. Hello, Chuck was stunned by the woman's strong demeanor. She looked like the perfect example of strong, independent women. Could she be the boss of this restaurant? What's wrong with you? The woman looked at Chuck and was very angry. If you came to apply for a part-time job, sorry, you are unqualified. Chuck was stunned. He looked down at his own clothes and realized his mistake. In such a high-end place, his clothes and shoes cost less than $100. No wonder she thought he was looking for a part-time job. It seemed he had to change his clothes. Go away. Director Main asked you to leave, do you hear her? The security guard came over again and scolded him. Chuck said helplessly, I am not applying for a part-time job. Why did you come in if you're not applying for a part-time job? Get out. The security guard glared at Chuck. Now that the boss was angry, he had to quickly act according to the circumstances. Aren't you looking for the owner of this car? Chuck asked. The woman frowned and glanced at him, her tone even more frostier. Do you know? She knew that this car was a brand new version of the BMW 7 Series and it should cost more than $2 million. This was the standard for successful people. Would this young man in front of her know? She observed this person sharply, gaze like a hawk circling its prey. This person looked timid. Would he know such a successful person who owned a BMW 7 Series? She didn't think so, because Chuck's gaze just now made her hate him. Director Main, don't mind this nonsense. How could he know who the owner of this car is? Wait a minute, I'll go in and ask the owner of the car to come out. Leave, do you hear me? The security guard said politely and glared at Chuck with the last sentence. Chuck ignored the security guard and said seriously to the woman, sorry, I just started driving not long ago. The woman looked at him differently now. What was this person saying? What does your driving experience have to do with Director Main? The security guard came over impatiently to shoo Chuck away, but the security guard was shocked as he walked over. You? The woman was also surprised. She stared at Chuck from top to bottom again, the surprise clearly visible in her voice. This car is yours? This was because Chuck took out the car keys from his pocket that matched exactly the car keys to the BMW car. Sorry, I'll park again. Chuck opened the door and went in, trying to park the car as carefully as possible. The woman's eyes glistened with surprise. The owner of a BMW car that cost more than $2 million, but dressed in such low-key clothes? She knew too many young rich people. They were usually arrogant and domineering, but none of them was as modest as the one in front of her. This was really rare. Director Main? This car seriously belongs to this person? The security guard could not react on time. He was too overwhelmed. Such a luxurious car wasn't driven by a famous boss or someone of high caliber? Watch your words, this is a guest. The woman said coldly. Yes. The security guard agreed repeatedly. After Chuck parked the car again, he came out and said, sorry, you can park now. All right, the woman nodded. When Chuck was in the car, he received Yvette's message again. She sounded very disappointed. He couldn't bear to see it, so he wanted to go in and have a look. Check the booking for this person, the woman ordered calmly as she stared at Chuck, who was already walking into the restaurant. Yes, Director Main. The security guard immediately took out the walkie-talkie and asked, Manager Cannon, where is the reservation seat of the man that just entered? What, no reservations? This time, it was the security guard's turn to be surprised, because the modern restaurant's business was very good. In the evening, if there was no reservation in advance, there would be no empty table. That was to say, only those who reserved could have seats. Wouldn't a person who drove the BMW 7 Series know? No reservation? The woman's eyes flashed with amusement. Today, this person managed to actually surprise her twice. Interesting. Give him a VIP room. She commanded. Yes, Director Main. The security guard was envious and hurriedly told Manager Cannon. Chuck had no choice. He didn't know that modern restaurant needed a reservation. There was no vacant seat at the moment, and the receptionist gave him a nasty look. It was probably because he looked like he was dressed simply and they thought that he was just coming in to ask around. Chuck could only ask, can I go in and have a look? Let me ask, you are here for the toilet, aren't you? The receptionist frowned. Coming into a high-end place dressed like a beggar, he definitely wouldn't be able to pay if he broke a cup. No, Chuck shook his head. At this time, his cell phone rang. He took it and looked at it. It was Laura Jean. Chuck ignored it, but she called again. He had no choice but to answer it. Where are you, Chuck? When Chuck was about to respond, a few customers walked into the restaurant. The receptionist immediately said politely, "Welcome to Modern Restaurant. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," the man said. The receptionist immediately came out and made arrangements, not forgetting to shoot Chuck a distasteful glance before leaving. Laura, who was on the phone, heard this. "Chuck, are you in Modern Restaurant?" Laura was very surprised. The Modern Restaurant was a very high-end restaurant. A piece of steak cost more than $3,000, while the red wine cost at least $3,000 or $4,000. She had never been there before. Why was Chuck there? Modern Restaurant? Laura's boyfriend also heard it and sneered. "This guy is probably doing a part-time work there." Laura nodded. "Of course." Laura chuckled arrogantly. "Chuck, are you working as a part-time waiter in Modern Restaurant?" No. Don't worry, I won't discriminate against you. I just wanted to know why you weren't in class today." Laura smirked coldly in her heart. "You have to do part-time work. Otherwise, how can you pay me back the $6,000 from last time?" Laura was prepared to invite Chuck out. However, before she could ask, she heard another voice. It was an unknown woman's voice that sounded very polite. "Ah, hello. The VIP room you booked has been prepared for you. Please follow me." On the other side, Chuck was stunned. On the other end of the phone, Laura was stunned as well, and Conrad Lee had heard it. The two of them stared at each other and Laura sneered. "He is really good at acting. Even though he is a waiter, he still doesn't admit it, even asking his colleagues to put on an act with him. Does he think I'm a fool?" Conrad winked at Laura, who said in a delicate voice, "Chuck, you actually booked a VIP room in Modern Restaurant. I'll come over to see you, okay? Continue pretending." "Whatever." Chuck was also confused. What was going on? He just replied without thinking. Episode 14. What was going on? He just replied without thinking. Chuck was also confused. What was going on? He just replied without thinking. The manager of Modern Restaurant brought Chuck Cannon to the VIP room. He felt puzzled. "What's going on, miss? I didn't book it," Chuck said. "Hello, sir. It is Director Main that arranged it for you." The manager smiled slightly. She was also surprised. Why would the director arrange it so? After all, only a few people had the luck to be escorted to their rooms by Director Main like this. This confused Chuck. The woman outside just now? What did she arrange for him? However, since the arrangement was already made, Chuck just accepted it nonchalantly and followed the manager to the VIP room. However, when Chuck passed by the hall, he suddenly saw Yvette Jordan sitting at a table. She was just staring blankly at her phone, her gaze already dim and upset. She was very beautiful today and dressed up on purpose. She was wearing a knee-high dress revealing her long legs, her skin as fair as snow. Chuck could say for sure that she had grown up to be a beauty since he had grown up with her from young. Today, she looked stunning as her beauty reached its pinnacle. Chuck still remembered that when he woke up in the middle of the night a few years ago, he could see Yvette's figure, but she didn't know. It was rare to see Yvette dressed up so meticulously but looking so down in the dumps. Chuck almost couldn't hold himself back to tell her he was the baller. However, in this situation, it would only ruin the beautiful fancy in her head, earning Chuck a big furious slap from her. The thought dispelled Chuck's previous idea. In order not to let Yvette see him, Chuck walked close to the manager. The manager was a woman and she was also gorgeous. Seeing as this unknown man was walking so close to her, she blushed immediately. "Sir, please don't do this. I have a boyfriend. I'm sorry." Chuck's face turned red. After passing Yvette, Chuck apologized. "It doesn't matter." The beautiful manager blushed like an apple. "Sir, please come in." The beautiful manager opened the door to the VIP room. There were countless luxurious things inside. Chuck had never been to such a high-class place before. He was really surprised. He sat down and didn't know what to do. Since he was hungry, Chuck usually ordered a steak. The manager was surprised that he ordered it first. Why did he come here alone? "Sir, are you alone?" the manager asked tentatively. After all, the VIP room's expense was not low. "Isn't it a waste to come here to eat steak without a girlfriend?" "Yes, I'm alone." Chuck nodded. "All right, please hold on." The manager went out. Soon, the steak was brought in. Chuck had never eaten this before, so he asked, "Miss, do you have chopsticks?" "Ah?" The manager was surprised. The person who Director Main arranged personally the VIP room had never eaten a steak before. "I've never eaten it before, so." Chuck was embarrassed. "Sir, please wait for a moment." The manager walked out with a smile. At that moment, Conrad Lee brought Laura Jean over to the Modern Restaurant in his BMW. She had never been to this place before but heard that it was such a high-class place. She said disdainfully, that loser Chuck managed to find a part-time job here. It seems that this place is not so good after all. Based on how Chuck is, he will probably be around in 1 or 2 minutes. Let's enter in 5 minutes, Laura said with a look of disdain. Well, Chuck is here as a waiter. If I catch him in the act, he'll not dare to say anything or make a scene. After all, in such a high-end place, such a poor guy doesn't have the confidence or the right to speak loudly. He will only beg for compensation like the lowlife he is. Doesn't he like to show off? This time, I will make him pay 1 or 2,000. I'm looking forward to it, Conrad said expectantly with an evil glint in his eyes. He dare cheat me of $6,000, I'll make him pay with all the interests. Remember, come in 5 minutes, Laura said. Got it. Laura opened the door and got out. Conrad said in a hurry, the space is not wide enough. Be careful when you open the door. There is a BMW 7 Series next to you. You'll need to pay tens of thousands of dollars with just a scratch. Got it. Laura opened the door and got out. Seeing the new car, it didn't even have a car plate so she wouldn't know which big boss it belonged to. She looked at the BMW 7 Series several times and then back at her boyfriend Conrad's car, which cost about $100,000. She suddenly felt a pang of embarrassment. She thought, why can't I find a boyfriend that drives this kind of car? How amazing would it feel if the owner of this car was my boyfriend? Driving this to university would feel so satisfying. Laura was looking forward to it. It was a pity that there was no phone number on the car. Otherwise, she would keep it in mind and take the initiative to invite the person out. She took out her mobile phone to call Chuck and asked him for his VIP room number, which he revealed directly. Laura hung up the phone and sneered, let's see how long you can be arrogant for. Laura walked in. Seeing Laura dressed well, the receptionist at the front desk smiled and served her. Laura asked, do you have a waiter named Chuck Cannon here? Chuck Cannon? No. The receptionist shook her head. Laura looked down on Chuck further. His acting skills weren't bad, and even his colleagues were cooperating with him. She knew that the service charge of a VIP room cost $1,000 alone, with the lowest expenses being $9,000. Chuck could never afford it. HMPH, do you think I don't know that you only picked up $20,000? Laura muttered before continuing to say she was looking for someone, even giving the VIP room number to the receptionist. The receptionist brought her in. However, when she saw her teacher Yvette, Laura was surprised. How could teacher Jordan be here? It didn't matter anymore, Yvette would never know as the meeting was in a private room. Laura followed the receptionist and walked quickly. In the VIP room, Chuck's WeChat rang with a loud ding, indicating that he had received yet another message. He clicked on it and found that it was still Yvette. Baller, can you come here soon? Reading between the lines, he could still hear the disappointment in her voice. Chuck was conflicted but still chose to ignore it. At that moment, someone knocked on the door of the VIP room, and Chuck answered. The door opened and Laura walked in confidently, staring at Chuck's cheap attire. She was even more disgusted by him. Come on, if you're pretending, try to act the part too. Dressed in such trashy clothes here in a VIP room, do you think you're a clown? Chuck glanced at Laura and immediately regretted his actions. He just said it casually and didn't expect Laura to really come. However, since he already agreed, Chuck couldn't reject it now. Did she really break up with her boyfriend? Chuck could not believe it. Chuck, Laura walked over with red eyes. She pulled the chair and sat down beside him. Chuck's face turned red because of the sweet scent from her. Chuck, I broke up with my boyfriend. Can you comfort me? Laura squeezed out tears, looking pitiful. When she spoke, her soft, supple thigh leaned over intentionally. Chuck immediately backed up. Although Laura looked pretty and had a nice figure, Chuck didn't hate her, but didn't want anything with her. Laura saw Chuck retreating and grabbed his thigh. Are you a man? Why are you running away? What's in your pocket? Laura touched something square. It's a car key, Chuck blurted out, but he felt uncomfortable after saying it. Laura wanted to laugh out loud. Car key? Isn't it just a lighter? Try to act the part properly. She sneered coldly. Car keys. Shall I take it out and have a look? I want to see the kind of car you bought. Chuck could only say, it is not a car key, it's a lighter. Laura's heart was full of scorn. He couldn't continue to act when she asked him to take it out. Since he had admitted it, he was still definitely a loser. Laura felt thrilled to catch him in the act of lying. Chuck, this private room was reserved by you. Now no one can come in. Don't you want to do anything to me? Laura suppressed the disgust in her heart and came over. The clothes on her shoulders naturally fell down, revealing a black strap on her shoulder. Episode 15. The clothes on her shoulders naturally fell down, revealing a black strap on her shoulder. Lara Jean's figure was indeed amazing. At this moment, as the clothes shuffled off her body, Chuck Cannon could see her figure uncensored. He has been Lara's classmate for so long. Usually, when she bent down or bowed her head, he could occasionally capture this scene. However, the feeling of peeking at her was nothing compared to the real thing today. Chuck's heart beat faster, but he calmed down immediately. He clearly knew what kind of woman Lara was. What was she doing here today? Chuck retreated. Lara clung to Chuck as close as she could and did not let go at all. Deep down, she was anxious. She had sacrificed so much, but why was Chuck not moved at all? Why didn't he touch her? What a loser. However, she didn't know that Chuck was also anxious. Normal men would definitely have some reaction if they were by Lara like this. Chuck struggled to get away. Lara scoffed silently and looked at Chuck's pants. He obviously wanted to, but still pretended to not want to. He was really pretentious. She continued to seduce him selflessly, but a few minutes later, Lara frowned. What was going on? Why hadn't her boyfriend rush in at this time? She was secretly furious at the unreliability of her boyfriend. Did he want to wait until Chuck was raping her before coming in? Disgusting. After waiting for a few minutes, Lara was furious. She stopped seducing Chuck and stared at him angrily. She snorted and stepped aside. In front of Chuck, she took out her mobile phone and sent a message to Conrad Lee, asking him what was going on. Conrad did not reply to the message, but when Lara checked her social activity, she was absolutely pissed. Because he was very busy at this time, he was actually taking selfies with the BMW 7 Series on his phone, even adding a caption beneath the photos. "My dad's new car, I really want to drive it out for some fun." Lara was so furious that she almost erupted on the spot. "Your dad's car?" She knew that Conrad's father drove a Honda, which was 8 or 9 times cheaper than this car. She angrily replied, "Come here quickly, do you want me to get eaten by him?" If Chuck knew that the car he bought had become Conrad's father's car, he would probably be confused but amused too. Chuck was currently distressed because his mobile phone was ringing. He took it out and saw that it was Yvette Jordan's WeChat message of disappointment and sadness. He couldn't bear to see it anymore. If he didn't go back, he might really go to see Yvette. Then it would be hard to put an end to it. Lara received a message from her boyfriend, saying that he would come over now and ask Lara to continue seducing Chuck. Despite feeling disgusted, Lara still pulled open her collar and turned to Chuck once more. Seeing as Chuck was about to leave, she hurried over and hugged him again. After rubbing him, she raised her hand and slapped herself. Chuck was stunned. What was going on? "Chuck, I didn't expect you to be such a person." Lara squeezed out tears. When she heard footsteps outside, she quickly opened the door. Conrad then rushed in angrily. "Lara, are you all right? Chuck bullied me. He opened my clothes and said if I didn't let him, he would hit me." Lara hugged Conrad and cried, looking wronged and sad. She was really putting up an act. Chuck finally understood what she meant. Lara was trying to plot against him. No wonder she was so seductive and focused on him just now. "Look, my face is swollen. He is a bastard. How could he do such a thing to me? Help me get back at him." Lara cried and looked as though she was the victim. Conrad was furious. When he came over, he pointed to Chuck and scolded fiercely, "How dare you touch my woman? You want to die?" Conrad sneered. He wanted to see this person kneel on the ground and beg for mercy after being caught red-handed. Chuck didn't say anything. "Call the police?" "Okay." Chuck chuckled and pulled the chair to sit down. Lara, who was proud in her mind, was stunned. "What did he say?" Conrad was stunned and angry. "What did you say? You hurt my girlfriend, but you still act like this? Then what do you want me to do?" Chuck raised an eyebrow and looked back at Conrad. "You." Conrad was at a loss for words for a moment. Why isn't he begging for mercy? "Chuck Cannon, you are a bastard. My dear, call the police. I want him to go to jail. How dare he do this to me?" Lara cried. "Don't be sad. Justice will be served once these people are sent to jail." "Calling the police," Conrad said, pretending to call the police, but in truth he was confused. Something was wrong. Chuck was a waiter, so he should not even have the right to make a ruckus here. Why was he still sitting so calmly? Chuck smiled. "How dare you laugh at me? Don't you know that you broke the law? You will have to serve jail term for at least 5 to 6 years. Just wait and see." Conrad snapped. "Then hurry and call the police," Chuck said with a smile. "You?" Conrad was speechless again. What was going on? "You bastard." Sob. Laura cried even harder. Cry louder, Chuck said. Laura wiped her tears and glared at him. You guys put on quite a show. Now that it's over, I'll pay and leave now. Chuck said calmly. You are just a waiter. Paying the bill? Stop pretending. Laura was extremely mad. She did not expect Chuck to be so calm. If such, wasn't it a waste of effort to sacrifice herself to seduce him? Chuck, you hit my girlfriend. Conrad continued glaring at Chuck. It was beyond his expectations, but at this moment, he couldn't give up. Then you can call the police to examine your injuries. Chuck said calmly. How dare you play tricks on me? Conrad came over and grabbed Chuck by the collar. Chuck just looked at him. You can continue, because I'm going to call the police. Conrad, Laura was angry, but if he really called the police, they would be arrested instead. Laura could not stand this. She was annoyed because she had let Chuck look and feel her up. Conrad let him go angrily. At this moment, the restaurant manager pushed the door open and came in as she heard some noise. Sir, what's wrong? It is none of your business. Get out. Laura was already angry. She couldn't help shouting at the manager who she thought was still acting for Chuck's sake. Miss, please don't make a ruckus here. The manager frowned. She had seen a lot, and knew instantly that nothing good will come from these two people barging in. What ruckus? Still pretending. Your acting is so fake, I tell you. Do you think he'll believe that the poor guy wearing clothes less than $100 can afford the VIP room? He is a waiter. Laura mocked. Miss, be respectful. This gentleman is a VIP in our restaurant. The manager said seriously. A VIP? You are so funny. If your boss knows that you are pretending to put on airs at work, you will definitely be fired. Call your supervisor over. I want to complain. Laura sat down with a sneer on her face. She must vent her anger today. Hurry up. Conrad's face also darkened. The manager frowned. I am the manager here. You are not qualified enough. I want to see your boss. I want to complain. Laura shouted. The manager looked at Chuck, and she could only go out apologetically. At this time, Chuck sat down, but at the same time, his heart suddenly raced, because he saw Yvette pushing the door and entering. Apparently, she passed by and heard Laura's voices, so she wanted to take a look. Laura, Conrad, Chuck, why are you here? Yvette asked in surprise. Chuck's heart beat even faster. It's over. Why is Yvette here? Teacher. Laura immediately put on her puppy eyes. Teacher, Chuck just hit me. Did he hit you? Yvette's brows knitted fiercely and she glanced at Chuck. Yes, he hit me. He called me and asked me to come and meet him here at the modern restaurant. He said that he would treat me to dinner. I didn't expect that he would hit me. Oh, he wanted to, oh? Laura said and burst into fresh tears. Did you really hit her? Yvette's voice was sharp and unforgiving. Chuck, she is your classmate. How could you treat her like this? Chuck was enraged by Yvette, who was obviously taking sides without listening to the full story. I didn't hit her. I am here for dinner. Dinner? Yvette looked disappointed. Do you know how expensive it is here? And you're here for dinner? It doesn't matter if you don't have money, but you can't pretend to have money then you don't. Pretend? Chuck was angry. He wasn't going to keep everything a secret any longer and he was going to tell Yvette everything.